It's really not surprising that the Middle Ages are such prime settings for fantasy novels. Many of the most famous themes and characters are plucked directly from the extensive folklore, but of course reading about it and living through it are two completely different things. For the people at the time, these were not fanciful obstacles that a hero will overcome and create a perfect happy ending. They were a terrifying danger looming at their doorsteps. Perhaps some of the most terrifying beings to the medieval mind were those that acted as a mirror to themselves or some sort of warning, and none more so than the Revenant. A Revenant at one point was a man, but a sinful man who didn't repent nor desired forgiveness. Once buried, the man would rise from his grave and terrorize the local population. They were malevolent in nature, terrorizing towns by running through them at the dead of night, sometimes with demonic animals following them. But what's most present in the accounts is how they spread pestilence, disease, and death throughout any town they entered. In this period, people were very much aware of their own mortality. Thoughts of sin and salvation would linger over the dying, and whenever they went to church, they'd be confronted by the consequences of a sinful life. Not only in the form of preaching, but also in the images of doomsday and hell that adorned the walls, showing them what awaited a sinner on the other side. A Revenant embodied the concept that sinners were a danger to society in both this life and the next, with the added horror of losing one's personal agency to become an instrument of Satan. Like many folk beliefs, the roots usually go deeper. In the case of the Revenant, we can trace them back to Norse mythology, to a creature called Draugr. These were walking corpses that reeked of decay and violently protected their territory. They were feared for their ability to curse the living and to spread illness. Many accounts of Revenants in the Middle Ages largely come from the north of England, which was once under heavy Viking influence. The Revenant is therefore most likely a version of the Draugr that's been Christianized. Let's have a look at these Revenants. I had admonished him to confess his sins and receive the Eucharist, but he was occupied in thinking of what happened to him. He put off my wholesome advice until the morrow, a morrow that he was never to behold. That very night, devoid of Christian grace, he shared the deep slumber. A Christian burial he received, although unworthy of it, but it did not benefit him. By the handiwork of Satan, he was issued from his grave come the night time. Pursued by a pack of dogs with horrible barkings, he wandered around the houses while men made fast of their doors and haste not to make any errands until the sunrise, for fear of being beaten black and blue by this vagrant monster. But these precautions were to no avail, for the atmosphere was poisoned by this foul carcass, filling every house with disease and death by his pestilentious breath. The Revenant in this particular account was a man who had caught his wife cheating on him, and suffered a fall because of it. He died without confessing his sins. There's a certain venom and purpose that fills this account. It's from William of Newborough's book, Historia de Rebus Anglicis. Like so many of these accounts, the monstrous figure represents something greater. The existence of Revenants amplified the troubles in society, sowing seeds of greater problems. The sins of a person literally and metaphorically harmed the world as well as themselves, reinforcing the idea that the horrors that befall humanity were the fault of sin. And nobody was above sin. From the highest noble to the lowliest peasant, the stories of Revenants highlighted the struggle between mankind and its sinful nature. With the same gusto, Newborough accounts a story of a chaplain falling from grace. This man, having little respect for the sacred orders to which he belonged, so addicted to the vanity of the chase, he was designated by many the infamous title of Hundpriest, or the Dog Priest. After his death, the guiltiness of it was brought to light, which issued him from his grave. He was prevented by the holy inmates from terrifying or injuring anyone in the monastery. Instead, he wandered the walls with loud groans and around the bedchamber of his former mistress. She, after this frequently occurred, became exceedingly terrified. Personally, I think exceedingly terrified is a bit of an understatement. But how does one get rid of a Revenant? In the case of this chaplain, it's a twofold solution. The woman, his former mistress, came to the monastery begging for prayers in order to absolve her of her sin, and would promise further donations to the monastery for the rest of her life. Revenants, although terrifying, only existed in the short time between their death and their complete decomposition. In other words, you'll never see a skeleton roaming around, just a rotting flesh monster. Then again, waiting it out doesn't sound too appealing either, considering the disease and misfortune that they spread. The monks, serving as our pious heroes, decided to end the Revenant's reign of terror. To do this, they exhumed the body, only to then decide to warm themselves by the fires and leaving the corpse in the guardianship of one monk, who assumably drew the short straw. Of course, because it was nightfall, the corpse reanimated and attacked the poor monk, who conveniently fought back with an axe. The beast screamed and fled the scene, while the other monks rushed in to help their friend. The next morning, the body was discovered. Again, just a simply unconscious corpse, but half decapitated because of the axe blow. To fully destroy the creature, they burned him and scattered his ashes. This demonstrates the ritualistic vanquishing of Revenants. They were decapitated, often dismembered or mutilated, and then burned. Such actions would be considered downright crimes to do to a human body under any other circumstances. But of course, they were no longer human. They were monsters. There is also genuine archaeological evidence of this happening. In the village of Warren Percy, the village was decimated by the Black Death, leading to its abandonment in the following decades. But hidden in the remains is the first and only confirmed skeletal evidence of Revenants being exterminated. And it appears that this tiny village had a real problem with Revenants. The remains of 10 individuals were found, 2 of whom were estimated to be only between 2 and 4 years old. The remains of these 10 individuals was found separate from the main grave area. Their bones were broken, their bodies decapitated, and there was evidence of bone charring, meaning they'd been burned. But it was the changes at the end of the 13th century that would truly kill the undead. The increase in education and examinations of the human body played a key role in demystifying the mystery of death. Christianity also became less tolerant of the pagan tie-ins, such as the belief in Revenants, and in its place they strengthened the ideas of purgatory and pardons being given post-mortem, sometimes for payment. But that will come back to put scrutiny on the church in the next few hundred years.